Hello and welcome to episode 18 of March to the Sea, the Vandals Let's Play series for Total War Attila. Last time, simmering hostility with the Western Roman Separatists boiled over into open confrontation, initially triggered by their siege of Argemund at the newly colonized Bisancio, and then by open attack upon Thorsamund and the Bloodboars. Hermenegild and Alavivus faced down superior odds at Salona, breaking the Western Roman Separatist power there, but with Alavivus paying the ultimate price for valor, and our allies, the Marcomanns, being pushed out of their territory. With my path into Cisalpine Gaul blocked, and the Ostrogoths too proud to agree to a military access treaty, the Huns were left to their own devices to plunder and lay waste to the Ostrogothic kingdom. Meanwhile, the Alamanns were wiped out by our Nordic allies, the Geats, Jutes, and to a lesser extent the Saxons. Erlieva lured the Caledonian assassin Kyrillos into a trap at Rome, where he was captured, interrogated, and somehow converted to the Arian Christian faith and the Vandal cause. Genseric bides his time in the Aegean Sea, while his son Hermenegild needs a path through the port city of Salona back across the Adriatic to garrison the defenses of Italy against Attila and his marauding nomad hordes.
Sometimes I have a terrible pain where my arm used to be, and it's as bad as when Josephus removed it. I now feel something similar in my heart that you bring me this grim news of Alavivus' death.
He's gone to the Lord's bosom, and he sent many heretics to hell in his time. There's no need for you to prolong your agony on behalf of the departed.
Christ, Arjabad, he was your brother.
Half-brother, and there's no need for you to take the name of the Son lightly. And how do you intend to reach your ships? The Romans now control the harbor through which you entered Dalmatia, and you cannot get back.
I don't know. If these Marcomanni have any fight left in them, they'll reclaim their own city. But if not, we'll just have to do the bloody work ourselves. We'd better get to work on the siege engines if we're to reach Rome before the Huns. If I allow Erlieva's church to be put to the torch, I'm sure she'll make a gift of more of my body parts to Genseric's vicious wife.
After the unmitigated carnage of the spring and summer of 423, we resume our turn in autumn with the land of Dalmatia strewn with fallen leaves and the bodies of fallen men. There are still quite a few weakened Western Roman Separatist armies clustered about their provincial capital of Salona, which they have so recently acquired from our Marcomanni allies. I first see what agent actions can be taken to hinder them before I decide how to proceed further. Beneath Hoarse fails a misdirect attempt against the vengeance of Vetus, the one Separatist army with any significant strength left to it. Hethan is unable to effectively act, and my champions in the local area have already taken their actions for the turn. I still have Scarillo, who has been influencing the local religion in Libya. Given the situation in Illyricum and Cisalpine Gaul, I decide she's more needed around these areas, so she embarks to make the journey across the Mediterranean, which will take her a couple of turns at least. Punilla is still busy maintaining order in Caledonia et Hibernia, while my remaining priestess, Erlieva, fresh off her incredible conversion of the former Caledonian assassin Kyrillos, tries the betray skill, effectively the dignitary version of assassinate, to neutralize his former colleague Viridovix. Erlieva again scores a critical success, and we're now free from Caledonian harassment for the foreseeable future. Off the shore of Iberia, we've nearly cornered the ragged fleet that it's all that remains of the Abdanians, with Swinthila boxing them in and Dromiate on his way to administer the death blow. It's taken me several turns and more wealth than I can care to count, but I'm determined to finish them off once and for all. Genseric's brother-in-law, Indulf, the stellar if somewhat long-in-the-tooth commander of the Oath, has had repeated issues with loyalty, and now his loyalty has dipped into the severely low range, as denoted by the red ring or circlet by his portrait on the family tree. He's quite influential, even more so than Genseric at the moment, and that seems to be one of the contributing factors to his wavering loyalty, in addition to the fact that he's quite upset about having lost his political office to one of the governors. He's so influential that none of the other characters seem to have enough influence to make an attempt to improve his loyalty. Fortunately, I think I'm able to remedy both of these complaints by nominating him for tribal chief. which will bring down his loyalty below Genseric's and should make him less sour about his political stature. I don't have the opportunity to recruit new units for either of my armies around Salona, but I decide to go ahead and merge some of Hermenegild's depleted regiments in the Children of the Forest to make them a little more effective and resistant to morale shocks. The Solitude are in better shape, other than the fact that they recently lost their commander, so I only need to merge one unit. With that done, I end the turn. During the end-turn phase, some Jute forces are seen moving west into Gaul. With what purpose or ultimate destination in mind, I have no idea. Out of the blue, a declaration of war is issued by the Sassanids, the lone faction with power to rival our own. I'm not sure what made them decide to do this. Their young ruler Sasan admires strong empires, which would theoretically make him like our faction, although maybe he just wants to admire my heads of state as heads mounted on his palace wall, since he's also aggressive. He also hates the Eastern Romans, so he may be holding my long-standing agreements with that faction against us. I call in my allies, and we're joined by all of those who are not already at war with the Sassanids, and Sasan is joined by his ally the Afrigids and all of his numerous puppet states. More movement now by the Huns, who've split their forces between Mediolanum and the now desolate region of Genua to the west. At Salona, the Marcomanns demonstrate that although they're down, they're not out, and their king leads a brave assault to recapture their territory. Hermenegild is close enough to assist, and even with his help, the odds will be against us, and I'm sure the Marcomanni king will stand no chance without our aid. So I decide to make good on my role as an ally and reinforce the Marcomanns in an attack. Of course, we need to fight this one manually and give it our best effort. As we see from the map, the city faces the coast to the south, and presumably will be deploying from the east. The Romans evidently haven't converted the barbarian settlement structure yet, so their only garrison is a badly depleted unit of barbarian skirmish cavalry and a tiny garrison fleet, but the large Vengeance of Vetus army will be coming in as their reinforcements. As I thought, our army enters the battlefield from the east by land, while the Wavebreakers, the Marcomanni force commanded by Attila, emerge on the horizon, sailing directly toward the city port, where the Roman Separatist garrison fleet immediately dock and begin unloading the men from their ships. Attila and his men steer their landing craft toward the shore from the southwest. I start by marching Hermenegild and his men toward the walls to see if we can knock down the gates or damage the towers to help the Marcomanni king. However, as I approach the city, I see the Vengeance of Vetus approaching from the north. I start shifting my line over to the right to intercept the reinforcing Separatist army, although their cavalry have already reached the walls of the city and have been admitted through the gates by their comrades, and there's still a unit of slingers not far behind them. The bulk of Anatolius Tertus's force are still slowly making their way through the small hamlet north of the town wall. Meanwhile, Attila and his marines have made landfall at the docks inside the walls of the city, and my AI allies make an astonishingly intelligent play by running straight for the victory point while the Marcomanni archer ships pepper the decimated enemy commander regiment of skirmisher cavalry. As he reaches the victory point, the Marcomanni king immediately sets his men to securing the recapture of their city.
Men, remember the cache we sequestered at the foot of Woden. Raise the Marcomanni heraldry that our people will know of our return, and then swiftly unearth the buried weapons that we may rearm the populace.
The Roman cavalry, although inside the city, are initially paralyzed by the northeastern wall, presumably uncertain whether to defend the walls from assault by my army, assist their comrades outside the walls, or fight the small amphibious force already inside the city. As we'll see shortly, their hesitation proves fatal to the Western Roman Separatist forces. My archers have caught up to the advancing army and begin unleashing a torrent of arrow shafts upon the hapless Romans. A unit of mercenary Germanic hunters break off from the column in loose formation to skirmish with my longbowmen, but they are severely overmatched in number and quality by the Germanic archers, who easily and rapidly shred the ranks of the hunters. The remainder of the Roman reinforcements continue toward the northern gatehouse, where my cavalry have circled round to the rear of the column and begin harassing a unit of Mediarii javelin men. Attila and his retinue have driven off the Germanic brigands serving as the town garrison commander and have almost halfway captured the victory point. And although no enemies oppose them at that point now, they remain under heavy fire from the guard towers. My cavalry ride down the Roman javelin skirmishers, which prompts 3 units of legio to turn around and aid their comrades. My archers switch their fire from the already decimated hunter unit to fire into the side of the legio infantry. Anatolius Tertus and the head of his column continue uninterrupted through the gatehouse into the city, which includes his retinue of Palatina guards and 3 Western Auxilia Palatina spearmen.
These Romans employ thieves and brigands to garrison this fair city. People of Salona, take up arms against the Roman occupier. Fight for your homes.
Perhaps emboldened by the sight of their commander arriving through the gate, the Roman cavalry inside the city kick their horses into action, galloping toward the victory point at the circle of standing stones. But by this time, Attila has already captured it, and the Roman victory point starts counting down from 150, and the count is proceeding fairly rapidly. The skirmish at the small hamlet to the north of the town continues, with my horsemen leading the legio regiments in circles on a wild goose chase, with the Roman hunter and javelin regiments already shattered and on their way off the battlefield. My archers continue harassing the Roman infantry with heavy shot arrows, causing a few casualties here and there, and my onagers continue raining fire down on the enemy units at the eastern wall, destroying one of the towers in the process. Nevertheless, it's clear by this point that the real struggle for the town is already underway inside, and our skirmish outside the walls is just a footnote by now. Attila and his Marcomanni marauders are hammered by a fierce cavalry charge which shatters his retinue, and the light bowmen are not far behind. However, the last remaining unit of heavy marauders south of the victory point hold their own for a while, and the Romans slowly start recapturing the victory point. Their points continue to run down toward the single digits. Just before Anatolius Tertus reaches the town center to add his strength to his cavalry, the last of the Roman victory points run out, and the Marcomanns are victorious, a valorous reclamation of their city with a little assistance from the Vandals.
They lie broken beneath the waves.
There were actually relatively few losses for all the armies involved, but with the Marcomanns reclaiming their settlement, their garrison and their fleet may be sufficient to hold any Western Roman Separatist counterattack at bay. Anatolius Tertus and the vengeance of Vetus fall back into the forest as the Marcomanns reoccupy their city. During their own turn, the Western Roman Separatist forces pull back even further into the territories to the east. Now back at the start of our turn, Hethen and Hermenegild have been the target of agent actions limiting their movement this turn. Now faced with political obstructions for Argemond and Hermanfrid, Genseric must ask his generals to support themselves, as I do not quite have a large enough reservoir of influence, and the situation with Indulf has gotten fairly delicate in that respect. Finally, we learn that the deadly Caledonian-turned-Vandal assassin Kerylos the Kingslayer has returned to his mistress at Rome to receive further instructions. I move Hermenegild back to Dyrrachium in Macedonia to replenish his army. He hires a couple of units of berserkers, a regiment of spears, and some Alani warhounds. Having Hermenegild in the province is also useful since I'm able to recruit a spy in place of the deceased Friedebald, and Hermenegild has the excellent mentor trait, which reduces recruitment costs for agents and provides new agent recruits with 2 additional ranks to start out. As it turns out, Friedebald's son has been training in Macedonia to learn the secrets of construction and architecture from Hethen, and his name, as it so happens, is also Friedebald, so I hire him into the faction to replace his father. The new Friedebald isn't nearly as clever or strong as his father, being both stupid and weak, but he's well liked by everyone he meets, and he's learned his lessons well of building from Hethen, so we'll keep him. I spend his extra points granted by Hermenegild's ability to rank up the builder skill and add tracking, military infiltration, and murder to his repertoire. With my new agent in place, I spend much of the wealth for the turn upgrading Macedonia, including the settlement structure and the Hall of Elders at Thessalonica and the olive orchard and trade port at Dyrrachium. Kerylos heads north, finding Attila and his armies besieging the daylights out of the Ostrogoths at Verona and Mediolanum and raiding the desolate region of Genua. While I'm in Italia, I decide to swap the fields at Neapolis over to a cattle herd since I think I'm going to need some military capabilities in this province, probably soon, and I would like to be able to recruit cavalry here. In eastern Gaul, Indulf continues his path of devastation southward and is faced with light resistance in an assault of Octodurum. He captures the city in a balanced auto-resolve, taking a few losses in the process. This has ranked him up even further, allowing me to max out the legend and wolf skills. It's a shame Indulf is already 60. since he'll probably only last another 5 to 10 years if he's not killed sooner. Evaric moves south through the Alps to harass the steppe wolves, one of the many hordes surrounding Mediolanum. Unfortunately, Evaric is uncharacteristically unsuccessful in this endeavor, suffering a critical failure and is himself taken out of the action for a couple of turns. Hermenegild moves up north toward Aquila, toward the Huns, and Scarillo continues her journey across the Mediterranean Sea. With all this excitement happening on land, Genseric has been left with little to do except sail his ship around the Aegean Sea. But now he spots an enticing target in the island of Crete, which is held by Roman rebels. He brings the Larchen prows into port there, and with the assistance of a small nearby Eastern Roman fleet puts down the rebellion and takes control of the island with hardly any resistance to speak of.
Your orders?
I make the necessary adjustments to the buildings, repairing those I need and tearing down those I don't. Genseric winds up hiring a small band of Gothic mercenaries calling themselves the Madness, led by a captain named Vatharicus, who claims to be a Visigoth from the neighboring island of Rhodes. He and his men having sailed west to Gortyna, with the fleet led by the Eastern Romans. Vatharicus clearly has no compunction about leaving his former faction or employer for the Vandals, for the right amount of coin. How trustworthy could this man be? Vatharicus bolters the rank of his small force with a couple of Germanic spear regiments and some mercenary Persian slingers. Before I end the turn, Euric, my governor of Mauritania, has ranked up. I had his new skills, of course, but I had almost forgotten that Euric existed, since he doesn't show up on the family tree anymore, thanks to my having married him to the widow of Radagaisus, who I think originally was from the Visigoths, leaving Euric nowhere to be found. His loyalty is not that great, currently at 5, so something to keep an eye on. During the intern phase, the Jutes are clustered around Evaricum, perhaps attracted by the gold, or perhaps they've just come to guard the mines out of altruism. The Huns move up and place the newly captured Octodurum under siege. I did also notice at this time that Constantinople has at some point been captured by the Kartli, one of the few neutral eastern factions in our war with the Sassanids. Now with the Western Roman Separatists clearly on their heels, we receive a message from their leader, Appius Antoninus, with a request for peace. The Roman Separatists are not willing to amend the agreement to include any provisions for an alliance, trade, or non-aggression. But they do pony up a remarkable 6,000 in war reparations, so I take the money and peace for now, since I have at least minimized their threat for the moment and have a much bigger problem in Attila and his rampaging hordes. Hermenegild welcomes his first legitimate child, and Hunneric his first illegitimate child, the latter usually preceding the former and signaling that it's time to arrange a marriage for the son or nephew sowing his wild oats. Now that we see Saphrax, the relatively new governor of Macedonia has attempted to defame Brunhilda, one of the older wives in the noble family. I believe she's the widow of Athalaric, even though she doesn't show up on the faction page anymore. Nevertheless, Genseric is unwilling to stand by while the poor woman's name is dragged through the mud, so he intercedes. With Genseric away at Crete, Mada receives word from Hermanfrid that he has no intention of acquiescing to her requests, and increases his demand for more money and food to be sent to Britannia to supply the glorious reavers, regardless of Genseric's wishes. Mada, in her typical fashion, responds to this with a plan to castrate the poor man, to ensure he does not think of straying in the future. Genseric is more successful in his attempt to win over Indulf, whose loyalty is now secured. With the situation in Dalmatia at least temporized, I move Arjabad and the Solitude back toward Macedonia, while Hermenegild and the Children of the Forest depart for Italy. Both Hethan and Friedobald the Younger also make their way to Italy to assist with the defense and construction projects there. Arjaman and the Carian Crows depart from Bisancio, suffering through the attrition of the snows in the northern Alps to arrive at Octodurum, where they relieve the siege and drive off the attacking horde, the Scourges of Hyperborea, who flee south into the mountains. With the huge number of forces Attila has brought to the region, I bring yet another army, the Bloodboars, led by young Thorsimund, to further reinforce Indulf at Octodurum. I have a large amount of wealth in part from the torn down buildings from last turn, and in part from the large sum paid by the Western Roman Separatists, and I use some of this to make various improvements to the Maxima Sequinorum province that has now come under entirely Vandal control, in particular upgrades to the settlement buildings at Bisancio and Argentoridum, along with repairs to Octodurum are made. I also start upgrading the settlement at Rome to Tier 2, as well as beginning the costly conversion of the structure at Crete, following Scarillo's arrival to the island.
Yes.
I checked the diplomatic panel, finding it mostly unchanged, although the Markomons agreed to trade, military access, and a small payment of what they can afford in gratitude for our assistance at Salona. I do notice the African separatists have finally begun to expand further west into their province of Tripolitana. I was out of money for agent actions, but I'm able to put the cash obtained from the Markomons to good use, and Kyrillos makes an assassination attempt against Attila.
Of champions.
Although Kyrillos is able to look the devil in the eye and lives to tell the tale, Attila is still only wounded and must retire to his yurt for a time. With that small victory, I end the turn. The Jutes head further south, whether to aid against the Huns or to pick the corpse of our empire after the Scourge is gone, I don't know. The Huns again have moved toward Octodurum, now with 4 armies present, one of them at the walls of the city and the other 3 in the mountain passes to the south, all of them bristling with the weapons of elite Hunnic troops. 2 other Hunnic armies move west into the fog of war. Now I find out that Hermanfrid has not suffered the loss of his manhood lightly. In retaliation, Mada, Genseric's wife, has been assassinated, literally bludgeoned to death for her indiscretion in this matter. Although the identity of the killer is not disclosed, it's possible that Genseric may turn a blind eye and not to ask too many questions, given his wife's penchant for dismemberment as a punishment. Now in the diplomatic panel, I notice that the Ostrogothic throne is now occupied by Goswintha, who's actually not a particularly young man, and while temperamental and aggressive, he still seems more reasonable than the previous occupant, Vidamar. This looks like a golden opportunity given Genseric's having recently been widowed and the multiple young women with positive traits in the Ostrogothic family. Genseric chooses the young but ambitious Matasuntha as a potential new wife, and Goswintha agrees to the proposal without any conditions. With that arrangement cemented, the floodgates have opened, and it seems that the Ostrogothic mail-order bride store is now open for business, and I managed to obtain good young wives for both Hunneric and Arjabad in this manner. Even so, Goswintha is still leery of granting us military access. Back at Octodurum, confident, arrogant, flaccid, curious Indulf sallies out again to drive off the Hunnic besiegers. Hermenegild and the 2 builders make landfall in Magna Graecia, and while the builders are present, I go ahead and make upgrades to virtually every building in the province that I can, which exhausts almost all of my surplus wealth for the turn. Back in Dalmatia, Hoarse tries to kill the aggravating Western Roman Separatist spy near Salona, but is unsuccessful, although the opportune failure means it doesn't cost me anything. Cinderid rejoins the Solitude before the army returns to Macedonia. Now with Evaric back and just enough wealth, I make a harass army attempt against the Rough Riders, who are one of the 4 Hunnic hordes in the mountain pass south of Octodurum. He gets a critical success, so even though the unit bars are only slightly decreased, almost every unit is affected, so in reality his sabotage caused hundreds of casualties. Evaric ranks up as a result of his success. Now I've finally cornered the Abdonians in the gulf between Gaul and Iberia, and Swinthila pursues their fleet relentlessly, finally exacting revenge for the defeat he suffered long ago at the hands of their navy, the Wave Cutters, as well as the loss of Gismus and his mad raiders. This is the end of the Abdonians, who are eliminated as a faction. I want to try to get rid of the Picts too, so I move both fleets north, but I'll see if Hermanfrid has recovered sufficiently from his encounter with Mada to catch them in his transport craft. The glorious reavers embark, and are right next to Ardio's Claws, the solitary Pict horde off the eastern coast of Tuesis. I don't have the movement to catch them this turn, but perhaps next turn they won't be able to get far enough to escape. During the intern phase, perhaps in response to the news of the demise of the Abdonians, the Caledonians ask for peace, but again I decline. Erlieva has forgiveness in her heart, but not Genseric. The Huns who disappeared into the fog west of Mediolanum last turn razed the Ostrogothic city of Segusio, while the hordes in the mountain pass between Octodurum and Mediolanum hold their ground. We've evidently had a rebellion at Durocotorum, but the Gallic rebels who appear are driven back by the Geats. Although during their turn they come right back to assault the city. Even though the balance bar is against us, this looks winnable, although I'm basically ready to cede this region since the Geats have already taken the better regions in the province, so I decide to just auto-resolve it, expecting to lose. However, in spite of my best efforts to be defeated, the sturdy little garrison hangs on to the town and beats back the Gauls. At the start of the following turn, I find that an agent of the Aria has come all the way to the island of Crete to harass Scarillo. We also learn that Brunhilde, who was so recently drawing the defamatory remarks from Saphrax, has died of old age, so her reputation is now only of academic interest. Carillos tries a harassed army attempt against the steppe wolves, but as a result is a critical failure. He winds up injured. Hermenegild is also unsuccessful in his attempt against the blades of the steppe.
Their life is mine.
Indulf waits for the sun to go down, and then he marches his army through the mountain pass to confront the steppe wolves in a night battle, turning the balance bar from a certain defeat into one that's actually in our favor. I choose to fight this one manually, not wanting to leave the all-important Indulf or the Oath totally up to chance. The ground overall is quite uneven, although there's a slight incline predominantly toward my right, so I line up my army there with the spears up front. I can't see the enemy other than the location of their large onagers, which cannot be hidden. I start moving my army further up the slope and around to the right side to gain high ground advantage. I think this could be particularly important considering all of the cavalry we'll be facing. The Huns make no move to respond other than by angling their battle line slightly. Secure with their elite archers and large onagers, they have evidently want me to come to them. Indulf, however, has a few tricks up his sleeve. Once my army is mostly in position, I move the cavalry further out to the right, and I send the lone unit of Alani warhounds advancing through the trees on the left. As the handlers and their hounds close in on the Hunnic battle line, there's confusion among the ranks as their formations flow unsteadily into one another, and then the dogs are released. The Alani warhounds first reach the mercenary Germanic hunters on the left-hand side of the Huns' front line, and quickly tear through the lightly armored bowmen. The Alani spearmen handlers move quickly to return to the safety of the trees as the dogs, having left the archer unit a shattered mess, proceed into the heart of the enemy formation, tearing into multiple units, including an adjacent group of archers, spears, and the first of the two large onagers. The dogs manage to also break the elite but lightly armored and severely depleted spear-wielding Scirii warriors before they are themselves put down by the remainder of the Hun army. Indulf next orders the archers and cavalry forward. The cavalry maneuver with the Hunnic horse archers, and eventually work their regiments around the tight space between the enemy flank and the border of the battlefield, while the archers move up and begin loosing a barrage of flaming arrows at the mass of enemy cavalry. Either a crack shot or a lucky one strikes the enemy general in his neck, and as the commander falls from his saddle, discord begins to ripple through the already apprehensive enemy ranks. Even with the crash of the explosive onager shots ringing in their ears, the archers continue their withering hail upon the enemy cavalry, and several units begin to ride off, the bulk of the enemy line beginning to melt away under the onslaught, without even a single sword stroke or spear thrust. In response to the Reign of Terror, the enemy cluster together even tighter, which of course only makes the devastation worse, and the arrows come down even thicker, mowing down the densely packed crowds of men. The Germanic horsemen then charge in, still more units breaking and fleeing before the thundering hooves of the Germanic cavalry. Even so, the stalwart Bosphorian infantry hold their ground and my cavalry are at first driven back, but this only buys another minute or so, before the renewed cavalry charges break almost all of the remainder of the enemy. Only the Huns' most elite regiments hold their ground long enough for the infantry to make contact. A unit of mercenary Celtic axes, a holdover from Indulf's rampage through Britain, carve up some of the Urar archers, while the Bosphorian infantry require multiple cavalry charges to break, and the chosen Ura warrior unit essentially fights to a man. As the enemy run on their path to the safety and darkness of the trees, the Germanic horsemen ride them down. The Alani handlers gather their scattered few remaining hounds and set them on the trail of the last remnants of the fleeing Huns. The profit from ransom and release is actually very impressive, over 1,100, and well worth the integrity penalty in my estimation.
We can't do that.
The mountains are not completely devoid of neutral parties, however, as Indulf is able to hire some mercenary Alani horsemen to replace the two depleted Germanic horseman units, which he merges into a single larger regiment. Hethan has a successful misdirect attempt against the Scourge of the Steppe, the most southward Hunnic horde who is laying siege to Ravenna. For my wealth surplus this turn, I start building up the settlement structure at the still very rudimentary city of Lugdunum. I also start increasing the settlement structure at Aqua Sextii. I have empty construction sites at Syracuse and several at Gortyna, where I've put a well and a granary respectively. I don't have the wealth this turn to build in the remaining 2 spots at Gortyna. At the diplomatic pane, I try to make some more marriage arrangements. I really need to strengthen the ties with our allies, particularly the Geats, who remain fairly strong. I negotiate a marriage of Genseric's daughter Vili to the king of the Geats, Hrothgar. Surprisingly, the Eastern Romans now also agree to a diplomatic marriage of their young, efficient, and highly desirable Comina Flavia Attila to my young general Thorsimund. They don't agree to a defensive alliance, although it hardly matters at this point since we are mostly at war with the same factions, and in it together whether they like it or not. Up at the northern tip of Caledonia et Hibernia, where Manfred does manage to track down what's left of the Picts, and puts an end to them without much trouble. I decide at this point that my northern navies, which include numerous mercenary ships, are costing more than they're worth, since I currently don't have any maritime foes outside of the Mediterranean. So I go ahead and disband the navies of both Swinthila and Dromiete, which ramps up my income tremendously. I'll most likely bring back both of these statesmen as generals within the next turn or two to help fight the Hun menace in Gaul. During the intern phase, the Jute armies continue south, now into the Mediterranean. One of the Hunnic hordes moves west into Transalpine Gaul at Vienna, where they instantly attack. This looks like a vain attempt at defense for me, even though I could do some damage to the enemy, so I just opt for an auto-resolve with the expected result of defeat. Unfortunately, the Huns live up to their scorched earth policy and leave the region a smoking ruin. Attila has re-emerged at the head of a horde situated on the river between the desolate former regions of Segusio and Genua, where they're raiding the territory. The cluster of hordes in the northern mountain pass of the Alps hold their positions. We're informed of another imminent rebellion at Dura Cortorum, but I can't be bothered with that region for the moment. Genseric decrees Hermenegild's new position as a judge. We've finished research on the advanced siege warfare technology, potentially allowing us to build large onagers, if I can manage to build a tier 4 carpenter building somewhere. These could be helpful, but not necessarily against the Huns. Maybe simply to counter their own large onagers, although they don't have any fixed structures to demolish, unfortunately. I start work on the next research project, Elite Military Class. This grants free experience ranks to cavalry, sword, and axe recruits, and unlocks the noble Swabai swordsmen and the Germanic Spearmasters, both excellent upper-tier units. Attila's horde, the Scourges of Hyperborea, look to be composed entirely of cavalry, at least as far as I can see, and elite cavalry at that, with a tremendous number of horse archers and devil archers. I set my agent units back to work on the Huns, with Hoarse misdirecting the new force, the servants of the Khan, emerging from the east at Aquila, and Hethan misdirecting the glory of Ulgan north of Ravenna. Friedewald unfortunately does not have the same success against the Scourges of the Steppe, east of Neapolis. Hermenegild and the Children of the Forest move up to block the southern route of the Scourges of the Steppe, although the Children of the Forest aren't in range for an attack this turn. The time seems ripe for another strike by Indulf and the Oath, who close in for another night battle. But before he mounts his attack, Indulf calls on the two heroes, Evaric and Hermenegild, for their assistance.
I agree it's a fantastic contraption, but it doesn't look like you finished building it. And I can't imagine why you've taken me from the warmth of my tent in the middle of a snowstorm.
This is Hethan's new siege engine. Hermenegild has brought us the designs, but it seems we lack the supplies and the expertise to build a proper prototype here in the mountains.
Hermenegild, Genseric's boy? The years have not been kind. But at least I hear you have a woman in every tavern from here to Constantinople. Good man. Sorry, you may have mistaken me. I'm Hermenegild the Sea Rover. Oh, the one who refuses to join the Navy. Now I remember. In any event, we thank you for your kind service, but it seems your efforts have been for naught. Evaric has an idea. Let us show you.
The snowfall will conceal us and cover our tracks, eventually. The Huns' camp is not far from here. You can initiate another night assault, and I suspect you can single out one of their larger groups, but they'll still be quite strong. We must weaken them before your men attack.
Shall we use the pits covered with straw again? That was a fantastic ploy.
We could, but I think I have something better. Hermenegild has also brought along a few crates of Hethan's new ammunition for the siege weapon. It might be useless in a battle, but if we ignite a few barrels at the base of the mountain, we can probably initiate an avalanche. That could bury half their army.
Brilliant. You men are indispensable. And the tale of Indulf is likely to need a second volume, or even a trilogy.
Both Evaric and Hermenegild score a critical success in their harass army attempts against the Golden Skulls, resulting in a tremendous number of enemy casualties, probably up to 700 based on the unit bars on the cards.
Saint Peter will welcome the glorious dead into heaven tonight. The rest of us will have to content ourselves with victory and wine!
We're in a fairly similar scenario, with irregularly uneven terrain and areas of fairly thick forest blanketed with snow. Add to that, the opponent's force looks quite similar in composition, melee and missile infantry along with several horse archer and melee cavalry units. Of course, they'll have some heavy onagers as well. This time the enemy battle line is visible at setup. I arrange a fairly straight front line similar to what I had before, although this time I put the dogs and the horsemen off to the left flank. I send the Alani Warhounds straight at the left-hand side of the enemy formation, while the cavalry swing around in a further left in a wide arc. I also move my main battle line forward slightly, staying in the tree line and hopefully out of range of the large onagers. At the sight of my cavalry moving left, the enemy shift formations momentarily, but then once again square up with my main force as my cavalry vanish into the trees on the left, suggesting to me that they may have forgotten about or do not care about my cavalry. The Alani hounds are somewhat scattered by the incoming onager fire, but the bulk of the hounds and the handlers make it close enough to unleash the animals into the enemy ranks. Again, this is very effective in breaking the first unit of Ura archers they encounter. The Alani spearmen move in zigzags to try to minimize the impact of the onager shots as they move back, and in fact, the onagers have expended most of their ammunition by the time my spearmen make it back to my front line, although the unit has lost most of its men. The Alani and her Germanic horsemen continue to circle around to the rear of the enemy, approaching the large onager crews, although it looks like a cavalry charge won't be necessary, as the onager crews are not only out of ammunition, but they've been left as food for my Alani warhounds as the rest of the enemy have begun their advance toward my infantry line. The enemy general, on the other hand, is making a very enticing target, as he's left himself back somewhat from the rest of his advancing army, and his unit is quite depleted from the casualties sustained from Evaric's trap. Now the advancing Huns have come into range, and the tables have turned as my onagers are now launching their flaming shots into the infantry formations ahead, while the archers launch more flaming arrows into their cavalry. As their melee and shock cavalry approach, the archers slip behind their heavily armored spear infantry, who mesh their large shields together and plant their spears firmly to receive the charge. At the same time, my cavalry have fallen upon the enemy general's retinue, and the combination of numbers and attacks from multiple sides quickly brings down the general and shatters his retinue. Predictably, a morale shock is seen rippling through the enemy regiments, and several units flee before they have ever engaged. Nevertheless, several of their sturdier regiments do make it to my front line, and both the berserkers and axemen move up to assist the spears, while a few units have closed in on my cavalry regiments, determined to take their revenge for the loss of their commander, Menrote. The Bosphorian infantry hold out for a while, although the Chosen War warrior regiment are too small to pose a real threat in spite of their almost unshakable morale and elite fighting prowess. It's only a few more seconds before the few remaining survivors flee the battlefield, and then once again the job is simply to ride down the survivors.
Praise the gods! Your victory is moments away!
The result is a heroic victory, with the horsemen and warhounds claiming most of the kills, although the berserkers didn't do poorly either, considering the quality of their infantry opponents. The spears held the lines, which is all that can be asked of them. Again, I choose to ransom and release for enormous profit, and now there are only 2 hordes left in the mountains. I have 8 armies and 1 fleet active now, but I can still have up to 4 more armies, so I start by reactivating Swinthila as a general. He raises a new force, the Giants, at Evaricum, where he recruits some spears and bowmen, and takes a few mercenaries for the time being as well to bolster the ranks. Dromiate, on the other hand, raises the Seekers of Glory at Aqua Sextii, where he builds mostly from expensive mercenaries, although he adds some spearmen and warhounds to the mix. I still have a significant amount of surplus wealth left to spend, and I put it to good use in Italia, upgrading the storehouse at Rome. I'm finally able to convince the African Separatists to a military alliance and military access, although they annoyingly asked to squeeze an extra 500 wealth out of me for it. This is fortunate since they now have control of the entirety of Tripolitana, although their strength is still rather meager. We'll leave the story here for now. We've helped our allies, the Marcomanns, regain their home at Salona, although the glory here is mostly deserved for the excellent generalship of their commander Adalgisel. We took Octodurum from the Western Roman Separatists, and that combined with the bruising confrontations with the Solitude and the Children of the Forest last episode convinced them to beg for an end to hostilities, to which we agreed, with a tidy sum paid by the Separatists in recompense for the war. The Huns hammered the Ostrogothic dominion of Cisalpine Gaul, although their attempt to move north through the mountain pass has so far proved a catastrophic error on their part, as they've been outmaneuvered, outfoxed, and outfought by crafty and legendary Indulf and the Oath, along with his heroic companions, Evaric and Hermenegild, although Attila remains alive and ultimately unharmed after an assassination attempt by Kyrillos, and desolation by the hordes proceeds unchecked into our territories in Gaul. Genseric remains at Crete, with his fleet and the untrustworthy Visigothic mercenary captain Vethericus, unable to assist his people in the land war with the Huns, but guarding against the alien foe that has recently made known their hostilities, the Sassanids. Thanks for watching, and join me again next time for another episode of March to the Sea.